My fascination with gender didn't really start because of this project. In fact, I actually wrote a couple of essays last semester about gender, especially in context of Frankenstein. When we were initially reading Frankenstein, I was struck by the similarities between Frankenstein's monster and the tragically misogynistic UCSB shooter Elliot Rodger. While that connection wasn't really appropriate for the type of writing that we did last semester, it fit really well with this first essay. So that was my starting point for the first essay of the Progressive Essay Project. I talked a lot about Frankenstein's sexual affection for Justine and the fact that she refused to reciprocate that affection. I was really pleased that I found a way to discuss sexual violence and gender expectations in an encounters text, but with the way the essay turned out, it worked much better if I used those things as support and talked about something different in the claim. Shout out to my new best friend Veronica for helping me come to this realization. She's my new best friend. So, while the thesis and the abstract don't really reflect this, Frankenstein turned out to be an awesome lens through which to analyze gender and sexuality. Beyond Frankenstein, I found myself looking toward gender to explore a number of our fall texts. All About My Mother, for instance, looked at gender fluidity. And of course, I have to mention the Book of the City of Ladies and The Second Sex, which together provided a really interesting illustration of the evolution of feminist thought. I even started the practice of making inferences about gender when it wasn't as obvious. Genesis, for instance, had a lot of really fascinating discussion about gender, even though it wasn't the focus. Although we've only read a few of the spring texts, I don't think that I've seen great things as far as really rich gender-based content. Marx, for instance, had almost nothing, and neither did Nietzsche. When I read it on my own, I'd probably say the same thing about Gandhi. I didn't see a lot of gender-based content, but actually, a lot of our in-class discussion was based on gender. It was interesting. We talked about Gandhi's attempt to reclaim the masculine. It was something that I didn't really pick up on my own, but it kind of made me think that gender can be found even when there aren't exactly characters. I think the good news is that means that there's hope for my progressive essay project. While so far a lot of the spring texts seem to be essay format, without really character narrations, this discovery about Gandhi makes me think that I can find subtle hints about gender in topics that aren't really dealing with the issue. However, I do think that this means that I can't exactly make my progressive essay project theme super precise at the moment. This is because I only see glimpses of gender, and those I have to search really hard for. That being said, I do see one potential route. With both the fall and the spring collections of texts, I do see one common theme, and that's kind of the ascribing of gender to certain behaviors or objects that don't really have gender in the first place. I'm not entirely sure what grand claims I can make of that, but I see it as a common theme, and I suppose the reason for doing this is to develop a grand claim by reading the texts. So I suppose that's where I am going forward. I had a pretty positive experience with my first essay, although my focus didn't really match up with my thesis. And while it doesn't at this point seem like gender is going to be a really prominent theme in the texts, I'm prepared to dig deeply and find what I can about the subject. Like I said, I might have one idea of which direction I want to take this, but there really are a number of ways I could go, and I don't want to be held down to anything. So, although I realize it's extraordinarily broad, I think that it's safe to stick with just gender as my subject for the Progressive Essay Project at this point. I hope it doesn't sound like sucking up when I say that I'm actually really excited for this project. Like I said, gender is a really fascinating subject for me, and while the essays are a little bit time-consuming and the texts aren't exactly light, this is definitely something that I find myself getting behind.